Thomas, have you ever been to Australia, mate?
No, I haven't. But one of my best friends is Australian.
Is that me?
Some of my friends. Well, no, not you. You're not really Australian. You're half Australian.
And also, I'm not your best friend. You absolutely despise me. Wow, way to find out live on air.
I remember on the trip to Switzerland on the way to Constance for the last maybe hour, we were torturing Paul King with our Werner Herzog impression because he famously hates Werner Herzog. And then we came up with Australian Werner Herzog.
It's not a significant bullet, mate.
It's not if you say in the land of darkness, you know, an alien visit Earth and he cannot understand the flames.
Oh, you went a
in
bit
Kuwait.
Texas. That was going so well, and then you flubbed that. You flubbed that diphthong there. Never mind. Let's stop this. I will be tempted to do this the whole episode, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, I was very excited when you explained Australian upspeak for an extended 15 minutes.
Yeah,
but
AQI.
For a prime example of Australian upspeak on this episode of Beneath the Skin, the show about the history of everything told through the history of tattooing, I'm one of your co-hosts, Thomas Manny, and I'm joined by, as ever, by my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt Lauder. See, I didn't forget it this time, dickhead. I saw you looking at me like I was going to forget. Fuck you.
It's like my activation phrase, I told you.
You're the Manchurian candidate, except the activation is me forgetting to do the intro.
And we are here with the reason I was both of us really were butchering Australian accents to a great or lesser degree is because we're joined by the incredible MJ Forrest. Listen to the show, incredible tattooer in Melbourne, Australia, and just all round super interesting guy. And welcome to the show, Michael MJ. What we call you Michael? Call you MJ? What do you prefer?
I think it's customary in Australia to just call me cunt, but you can call me whatever you want. Michael, MJ. I'm cool with whatever. The Australian accents made me feel.
I was
really
about to say,
safe.
what does your mum call you? But does your mum call you a cunt?
Cunt.
Well,
Straight
it depends.
up.
Does your mother call you a sick cunt or a dog cunt? It just depends.
She pretty much calls me. Yeah, it's more of a dog cunt for sure. For sure. Yeah.
As long as she's not calling you a shit cunt, then that's unforgivable.
The only thing she's never called me is a son of a bitch, and I think that's fine.
Yeah, but yeah, this episode's been a long time coming. Also, you forgot to mention that MJ is also a fellow podcaster, man.
Oh yeah,
you know.
well, plug away.
Yeah, I stopped doing it a while ago, but there is a podcast that exists called the True Love Tattoo Podcast, where I basically interview various Australian tattooers about their career. And then in the second half of each episode, I pose them a very specific premise, somewhat philosophical premise that we then sort of noodle out together.
Maybe that's a decent place to start. So we want to get into obviously some Australian tattoo history in some detail, but I guess maybe we can start with the Australian tattoo present. Like what's tattooing like in Australia now? I've got a few friends who tattoo there, people who've gone out or gone back to Australia to tattoo after having worked in the UK for a while. People like Rich Hardy or Alison Manners. So what's happening in Australia right now?
It's a really, really strange time for tattooing in Australia right now. It's sort of over the whole country, everyone's a bit quiet, but not like in and out of our lockdown sort of quiet. If anything, after like COVID, we were having like a boom. And then now it's just sort of like the cost of living here in Australia is just going up and up and up. So yeah, people are sort of like holding on to their coins a bit more when it comes to unnecessary expenses like tattoos. But tax time is just around the corner, so flat screen TVs and tattoos are going to be top of the list for people who just blow their money on. But yeah, it's strange. It's like tattooing in Australia is it's really, especially here in Melbourne. Like I remember wanting to move to Melbourne because I saw it as like the mecca of tattooing in the Southern Hemisphere. You know, a lot of people, it's sort of like, there's too many tattooers, it's oversaturated. Why would you want to go there? And it's like, that's kind of why you want to go there. It's like, if you can make it in Melbourne, you can sort of make it anywhere. That's sort of how I viewed it when I was moving here.
Yeah, and it's been a kind of like mecca for tattooers for a long time, right? Like it's been obviously a really important set of naval ports, a really important holiday destination. Like a lot of people are passing through, like on gap years and traveling. So it's sort of even just culturally quite set up to be quite, quite kind of central for tattooing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially Melbourne. Melbourne's got like such an amazing history. There's people like Cindy Ray from Melbourne, who was famous all over the world. So like there are Australian tattoo icons from a long time ago that are like well known internationally, which for a little island country so far away from everywhere else, I find that kind of impressive for those people who have made an impact in Europe and America and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, one of the things that really surprised me about when we started going through the Jesse Knight flash collection that's now in Wales, a huge amount of the flash sheets in that collection are by Australian artists, either artists who have identified, or actually quite a few. We don't know definitely who they're by, but it's really clear that Australia has been a really important part of this network for a very long time, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Alf Mingins went out to Australia, I think, in the late 50s from London, and these connections between European tattooing and Australian tattooing are very, very deep rooted, right?
For sure, you got people like Bill Finesse, also from the UK. Like a bunch of them came out here, sort of set up. Like Alf Mingins, probably, he was sort of seen as the best artist out of everyone. At the Tattoo Museum down in Geelong, at Brett Stewart's Tattoo Museum, he's got a huge collection of Alf Mingins stuff. He's got like full oil paintings that are just beautiful. And a lot of the other sort of tattooers of his era, it was almost like you're a tradesman. You do the flash, you come in, you pick it out the door, which is much the same everywhere else in the world. But I feel like what kind of set him apart at the time was that he was like a genuine artist in his own right.
Yeah.
I think maybe I suppose to start, because obviously like each different part of the world generally has some kind of different attitudes towards tattooing that's like based both on like culture and like a kind of certain visual aesthetic that's around like visually surrounding everyone, but also like the climate. And obviously Australia's quite hot. There's the joke about the Australian sleeve is not on your leg rather than your arm. Can you just, I suppose, to give us a bit of a grounding, what's the general attitude towards tattoos in Australia?
I think the general attitude, I'm sure it's similar elsewhere. I remember growing up and tattoos were still kind of taboo. So 90s, early 2000s, still very taboo. And it was like criminals and, sailors. And that's it, and even sort of when I started tattooing full-time 2014. People with two full sleeves, that was like, oh, you're heavily tattooed, you have two full sleeves. And in such a short period of time between like the last decade, people have eyeballs and face tattoos and all sorts of stuff. But like they're still, I know a guy with his hands tattooed and his neck and stuff, and he works in a bank here. So I feel like Australia has been quite progressive in the last 10 years, but it was a bit of an uphill battle to get to that point.
And it's kind of ironic as well, considering the general kind of pushback against that as well, because obviously I've heard quite a lot about how bars and clubs and stuff in Australia are like super strict around visible tattoos. Like if you have tattoos on your neck, you're pretty much just not getting in.
Yeah, the whole state of Queensland specifically is like that because of the connotation that if you have your neck tattooed, you're a bikie. So there's really crazy bikie laws in Queensland and also in New South Wales. But Queensland, yeah, you can't get into a club or anything like that if you have visible tattoos, really.
Yeah, Queensland probably at least a decade ago, tried to bring in a law where every tattooer had to record every single tattoo they ever did to try and sort of stop biker gangs doing money laundering through tattoo shops, and B, to try and aid in like criminal identification, right? Like that was sort of, even that was it was a push too far. It didn't come in, but that came very close to becoming law in Queensland, didn't it? That law where every tattoo you did, you had to take a photo of it, take the customer's name and address, like talk about how long it took you to do, like to try and create a paper trail to stop some of this cultural contacts between tattooing and the underworld, right?
It's very ironic considering paperwork is something that tattoo artists love doing. Very famous for loving doing paperwork, keeping logs of stuff, accounts.
What they ended up doing was implementing tattoo licensing laws in Queensland and in New South Wales. And that came in right at the time I started tattooing. So basically you had to pay $800 for a 3-year license. You had to go and give your fingerprints, get a police check. If you had any form of a criminal record, you weren't eligible for a tattoo license. So there were like old guys that have been tattooing for 20, 30 years, maybe punched a guy in a pub a while ago, got an assault charge, and now he doesn't have a livelihood, And so when that sort of happened, a lot of people ended up moving to Victoria or other states where there are no tattoo licensing laws. And the really frustrating thing is
why you moved there?
Totally. Yeah, it's so strange. What was really weird though is once the 3 years was up and you had to like reapply for a tattoo license, they made us go and do our fingerprints again, as if our fingerprints fucking changed.
No.
And you're going into the police station. The fingerprint machine is right where the holding cells are. There's people in there covered in blood and shit. And you're just like, sorry guys, just got to give my fingerprints and then fuck off home straight after. Like, it's a weird system. But basically they did it to try to eliminate all the bikey sort of stuff. But they just find loopholes. They find ways around it. So yeah, I think that was sort of what they ended up doing instead of the record keeping.
Famously, people that break the law in loads of other ways won't break the law about record keeping. This is what we know.
Yeah.
Also,
totally.
as well, like your fingerprints are like very kind of ephemeral because I have like barely any fucking fingerprint left on one of my hands from working with like in kitchens and with hot stuff for years.
Working down the podcast mines.
Working out, like I'm just moving that mouse. It's just incredibly knurled. I've covered my mouse in sandpaper. But, just get an incredibly knurled grip for your tattoo machine. It's like, well, I don't have any tattoos, or I don't have any fingerprints. So what can I say?
I think in general that this is a good example of how the histories are connected, but different from place to place. Because I talk primarily, of course, about Britain and America, which have intersected but different histories. But when you get to places like Australia, where the climate's different, so people are wearing different kind of clothing, the class structure is oriented slightly differently, and the kind of sociological relationship to tattooing is different. You end up with this, these sort of ripple effects down the line. I mean, one of the great sources for tattooed records amongst prisoners is actually the transportation records of people getting sent to the Australian colonies, getting sent to Tasmania, and getting sent to various ports in Australia. And so, of course, like the spectre of the criminal man, if you like, in Australia is obviously looms a lot more culturally large, and those things become slightly self-fulfilling in some ways, right?
Yeah, when all of my people got sent over there
for stealing that loaf of bread. But like you're totally right, Matt. I think maybe the connotation that tattoos are for criminals might come from that, because as old as Australia is with its Indigenous culture, it's kind of weird that there was no sort of Indigenous tattooing like a lot of other countries. Like the Indigenous people here had scarification sort of ceremonies and stuff like that, but no actual tattooing, which is kind of bizarre when you look at nearly every other culture there seems to be a form of tattooing, and Australia doesn't have it. So Australia's sort of introduction to tattoos was the colonization and all the sort of convicts coming over with pre-existing tattoos.
Yeah, and that's that whole story is the Indigenous Australians is basically the one of the only cultures that don't have any documented tattoo. I mean, there's plenty of other body modification practices, as you say, but yeah, no tattooing. So maybe we should just talk about some of the kind of legends of Australian tattooing. I mean, so we talked a bit about Alf Mingins. I think there are a few names that come up. The sort of the central Australians who are part of the sort of global networks that we've been talking about recently are not that many, but there's a handful of them. So there's obviously Alf Mingins. John Entwistle, it seems to be very important. Johnny Dollar. What do you know and what can you tell us about him?
Huge.
MJ. Yeah.
I can tell. I have his signature on my wrist.
No way! No way!
Yeah, I've got some little roses that he's done in there as well. Johnny Dollar.
No way.
John Entwistle may be my hero, I think.
Wow.
And he's still tattooing. And whenever we have people come visit us, come guest with us, I say, you need to go down Punt Road, Richmond, and get a Johnny Dollar tattoo. You have to. I don't know how much longer he's going to be doing it. He hasn't been well the last few years. He's been having a bit of a rough trot. But if you can, go get it, and you will have a piece of history on you. And it's so great. I've been a bunch of times. I've been tattooed there twice. I've taken friends to get tattooed. And you know, if you go and you bring a girl with you, he won't swear. He's the absolute gentleman. He wears his little black button up and he slacks and he'll make you a cup of tea. But then if you're there with the boys, the dirty jokes come out and it's the best. It's like, it is the coolest experience ever. And he's surrounded by all his flash that you see in that amazing book that Jane Laver and Danny Young made years ago.
Done with electricity book.
It's on the walls. Yeah, it's around you. You're surrounded by it. It's the coolest experience. And I think what I like about Johnny is even in his sort of like heyday, he was amongst all the other tattooers in Melbourne at the time, or in Australia at the time, he was the most tattooed. He was
really?
absolutely covered. And a lot of small tattoos. If you ever see photos of him with his shirt off or whatever, he doesn't really have any massive pieces on him. It's just crushed out with a lot of smaller tattoos. So they'd look at him as like, well, he's crazy. He's completely covered.
Because yeah, he was. I have a feeling he may have even have been in the Bristol Tattoo Club and certainly in the Tattoo Club of America even before he was a professional tattooer. Like some of the. I don't know a huge amount about his life, but some of the dates that I found online say that he was tattooing in the late 60s started, but he's in the Tattoo Club of America like mailing lists in the early 60s. So do you know much about that? Or was he a kind of tattoo fan first or
I know he got his first tattoo. He was working for Australia Post and he hand poked a tattoo on himself while he was at work when he was like 14 years old. And then I'm pretty sure, Flinders Street, which is sort of like, it's a very prolific street here in Melbourne. Flinders Street Station is the main train station. It's sort of like the Grand Central Station of Melbourne, you know? So that whole strip, there were multiple tattoo shops. There were people like Dicky Reynolds, who is iconic, Tex Newell, all these different people that sort of tattooed. There was like at one point like 4 or 5 shops down this street, and they were all sort of tattooing like the merchant seamen that were coming in. And so Johnny opened a shop called Whistle Stop Tattoo in the 60s, and he was there for a while. And then he sold his shop to the Farrow brothers, who then sold it to was it Kevin Coppin and Vaughan Griffiths, and they started Sailor Bill's Tattoo Grotto. Bill Finesse also was on Flinders Street or near Flinders Street around like that sort of 40s, 50s sort of era. So, there were so many people down in that area. And when they opened Sailor Bill's Grotto, like Cindy Ray or like Bev was tattooing there. Jed Hill was tattooing there. It was really kind of like a who's who of Australian tattooing. We're going in there and doing the night shift and all sorts of stuff. Like Flinders Street was pumping for tattoos, like between the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was crazy.
Yeah, so I've got John Entwistle, who was the regional director of the Tattoo Club of America in 1965. Him and Cindy Ray basically said the following students are open. So there was Norman Collette in Brisbane, Bill Phillips and Dan Robertson, and someone called P.R. Weisemer in Brisbane. One guy in Dalby, Queensland, one guy in Mackay, Queensland. Like one tattooer per town, basically, right? Like one guy in Newcastle, a few guys in Sydney. Painless Alex, Bob Wood. Like it seemed like there was in the 60s, like in many places in Australia, right? There was one tattooer per town.
Yeah, definitely. Again, Sydney and Melbourne had a few for sure, but then places like Newcastle, Brisbane, like
the Melbourne list is Alf Mingin, Cindy Ray, Tex Newell, Dick Reynolds, Danny Robertson, the 1965. So probably Entwistle hasn't started tattooing by that point, right? This is 1965. So yeah, but he's sort of like all these guys, very weirdly organizing guys. Guy called Frank Collins in Adelaide. And then like a couple in New Zealand, but like, yeah, so that's 1965 according to the TCA. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22 tattooers in Australia in 1965 in the whole country. There's probably more of that on your road now, right, MJ?
Oh, for sure. In private studios, hand poking, bung fucking drawings. Yeah.
I think it's interesting at the time, I suppose, the influence of geography as well, because obviously Australia is fucking huge. And like, even when we were going through the Australian business cards in Rudy's collection, Matt, it's like, we're seeing business cards from like tattooists in like absolutely fucking bumfuck nowhere. And it's like, don't even know where this place is. And I suppose I want to ask if like, were these people like communicating with each other because like everyone's so far apart, or was it kind of you're in your own isolated little bubble and you're just working away?
Well, from talking to Johnny Dollar, when he was on Flinders Street, they were all fairly friendly with each other. And, they'd have like events and little conventions and stuff like that. So there was a community. But from my own personal experience, I apprenticed in a town called Wagga Wagga, which is regional New South Wales. It's the halfway point between Sydney and Melbourne.
Home of the Tichborne claimant. Like that's
home of the what?
This is where the guy who pretended one of the instigating reasons for setting up a tattoo industry in Britain was that people wanted to copy this aristocrat called Roger Tichborne, and Roger Tichborne had been lost at sea in the 1850s. He miraculously turned up alive in Wagga Wagga, working in a butcher's shop. Right, he'd been shipwrecked like 20 years earlier, and so he basically went back to London from Wagga to go and claim his fortune. Turned out like he'd forgotten how to speak French, which was his birth language. He didn't really recognize any of his old school friends. He put on quite a lot of weight, but he was going to set to inherit this enormous fortune, and the other relatives sued him, and there was a big trial. And in 1872, in the middle of the courtroom in London, they were like, Roger Tichborne, this aristocrat, he'd been tattooed at private school. Have you got any tattoos on your arm? Roll up your sleeves. And this guy was asked to like roll up his sleeves in the courtroom, and of course didn't have any tattoos on him. And it turned out, he was a butcher's son from Wapping who'd been working as a butcher in Wagga, but been telling everybody, just sort of complete coincidence, had been tall tales like, what, I'm from England, I'm like, my family are rich, they're going to come looking for me one day, like complete bullshit. And then turns out someone who was actually looking for some lost rich guy put two and two together and got five, got five, and he nearly got away with it.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, this boy
so
from Wagga's
good.
chancing his arm. Well, he was living in Wagga, chancing his arm. Was one of the driving influences in creating professional tattooing in Britain.
That is mental. It's like how shipwrecked do you have to be?
Yeah.
How shipwrecked do you have to be to end up in Wagga Wagga? No, like 7 hours from an ocean.
Yeah, well, you know where also where he started, where the ship got sunk. It was off the coast of Brazil. So that was the plausible story.
Easy mistake.
Yeah, easy. Yeah.
But so in Wagga, when I started, there was 3 shops. We were pretty evenly spaced down the sort of the main street. There's sort of kind of like 2 main streets. We were very like many blocks separating us, and we did not communicate with the other shops. They're our rivals. That's our competition. Like, you don't let a customer walk out the door without getting tattooed because they'll take their money down to the other shop. It was very much like that. So I think that's how I thought tattooing was everywhere. And then moving to Melbourne, it's a massive community where your customer comes in, they've got a tattoo from another shop, and, oh, that's a mate of mine. That's sick. Show us your collection. What else have you got since I've seen you last? It's really cool. But it sounds like Melbourne, even back in the day, was kind of like that.
Yeah, well, we've got to talk about our favourite Flinders Street tattooer of all time, Lindsay Vane. I was telling these Australians that were at this talk I did the other day about Lindsay. They'd not heard of him. I just want to read out this newspaper article, and then you can tell us more about Lindsay Vane. This is from the 40s. Lindsay Vane, who was tattooing on Flinders Street as well in the middle of Melbourne. I could do this in an Australian accent. I'm not going to. After a drink from a bottle of brandy bought for £1 and a beer chaser at 3 shillings a bottle, a constable searched the premises of a tattoo artist in Flinders Street, Melbourne, and to his amazement, found a box containing 12 live tiger snakes. As a sequel, Lindsay Vane, tattoo artist, was fined £35 at Melbourne City Court on Wednesday for having illegally sold liquor. Constable Gustav Haag told the court that on the night of February 2nd, he went to Vane's shop, where Vane was tattooing a ship on the arm of a youth. Vane said there was no scotch about, but he sold Haag a bottle of brandy. When police arrived, Haag searched the premises and found 16 bottles of beer in a back room, as well as the box containing the snakes, and 7 bottles of wine. Vane said he was going to take the liquor with him on a snake-catching expedition for the University of Melbourne. As a sideline, he caught snakes. Right. And then there's another article about Lindsay. 56-year-old man found in a city hotel waving a 3-foot tiger snake was discovered to be suffering from 2 kinds of bite, one from the tiger snake, the other from a bottle. He was alleged to have stolen the snake from a city tattoo studio. So this guy went out Lindsay's back room, stole a bottle of scotch and a snake, and got bitten by it.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys. Do you guys have any personal heroes that are absolute pieces of shit?
Oh, plenty.
Because my two heroes are Evel Knievel and Rocky Vane.
Do you want to know? Sorry, a slight aside, but do you know why Evel Knievel's called Evel Knievel?
Because he was in a cellmate with
Awful Knorful.
Yeah,
it's true.
Awful Knorful and Evel Knievel.
Yeah. But he was locked up, and the guy in the next cell was called like Steve Knorful, and they called him Awful Knorful. He's like, I suppose if you're Awful Knorful, I'm going to be Evel Knievel. How good's that? Anyway.
Matt, who's your hero who's an absolute piece of shit?
Sailor Jerry probably would be up there. Phil Sparrow.
Yeah, I'm definitely like, I don't know, mine is like fucking like Mark Rothko, shit like that. Just like people who are just like terrible people but made incredible art.
Yeah.
Any punk from the like fucking 80s, like
this is the thing. When it comes to incredible art, I've not seen one piece of flash or one tattoo that Lynn Rocky Vane actually did.
No, I was going to say, I was trying to, in preparation for today, I was trying to find some photos of any of his customers, and all we can find is like just his crazy snake life. The other article that you sent me, Rocky Vane snakes burned. 100 snakes caught for Melbourne Zoo were incinerated on the truck which brought them into the city. The snake caught fire when Rocky Vane were returning with their bag. And his wife Leona.
It's just an incredible Australian energy of like getting done for illegally selling beer, but the 12 snakes in the back room are totally okay.
Oh, the snakes? Yeah, don't worry about the snakes.
So what?
Yeah. He was an absolute psychopath. So basically, he was born in Nowra in New South Wales, and he just sort of moved everywhere. He was meant to be shipped out for World War I, and the day before he was meant to leave, he just ran off with his girlfriend. So one dick move. That's one dick move by Rocky Vane. I don't know if we can have a dick move counter, but it's going to go through the roof. But he was.
I'll add a ding in post production.
Right. He was in and out of jail, just always stealing shit, and basically. He went out to this island called Gardner Island off the coast of Western Australia. So, and he was just catching tiger snakes and some other kind of snake. I'm not too sure. And he had a show, a traveling show. He was like a carny, a performer, where he'd basically get bitten by the snakes and then perform first aid on himself and miraculously live. And people sort of were like, no, you're just using devenomized snakes. So he started getting small animals and killing the small animals in front of these people to be like, see, it's legit. And then he'd get bitten. And it was so bad that in the 20s, I think it was like I can't remember. At some point in the 20s, a court intervened and we're like, dude, this is animal cruelty. And I'm just thinking like what the threshold for animal cruelty in the 20s would have been.
In Australia towards snakes.
Yeah.
This is the real like tattooing's gone soft. Is tattooists don't even want to handle live venomous snakes anymore.
Well, Sutherland McDonald lied in a newspaper article. Well, I say lied. I presume it wasn't true. He said that he had snakes because he used them to when he tattooed snakes on people around their necks and stuff. He apparently told journalists that he had live snakes that he used to pose to get the composition right, which is definitely a lie, right? But it sounds
100%. He's got a box of eagles out the back.
Edwardian London is not very well known for being, acclimatizing to fucking live snakes.
He was in the Turkish baths though, so it was probably quite steamy and quite warm at some parts of that building. I don't think it's true, but and whatever they were, they definitely weren't venomous snakes. So like Lindsay Vane adding an extra level of danger.
Oh, I think it's just interesting that it's like, at this point, like you had someone like Jesse Knight, who was also like a sideshow performer, and you have like Rocky, who was like also one of these like insane people. It's kind of at this time there was the two veins. You had like the people in the white coats calling themselves professors, and then there's just the guy with the wild snakes who's like, letting them bite himself. It's like, oh yeah, I'll give you a tattoo as well.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because actually, the white coat guys, right? The Terry Wrigleys and the Lyle Tuttles of the world, the George Burchetts of the world, they actually were quite annoyed about these lunatics because they were making it more difficult for them to do their jobs. Like this is one of the reasons why was and has been so much rivalry in tattooing, right? Because the lunatics thought that the straight guys and gals were quite square and boring, and the straight guys and girls were like, if you keep acting the way you're going, tattooing's going to get. If you keep tattooing children, for example, like tattooing's going to get banned, and we're all fucked. So yeah, that eternal.
Speaking of children, when he was going to court, he took his 8-year-old daughter in and made her roll up her sleeves to show all the snake bites and be like, see, I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. She's fine. Like, I feel like tattooing your kids is nothing. It's like, hey, come here for a sec. Let the snake bite you. You know, he had his wife involved in the show, and her stage name was Cleopatra, and she died getting bitten by a tiger snake, just like Cleopatra fucking died getting bitten by a snake.
No way.
You know, and then he went back to work. He went back to performing 2 days later, and he got another assistant, some 48-year-old dude, and then that guy died. And then at that point, the court was just like, mate, you've got to fuck these snakes off. You can't have these snakes. What are you doing? And he's like, all right, I'll get rid of them. And he put them on this island off of Western Australia called Karnak Island, which pre-Rocky had no snakes. He put them on this island so he could nip out to this island to grab them when he wants them to go do fucking snake shit. So now this island is famously just rat fucked with tiger snakes.
Just the sense when he wanted to go do snake stuff is just incredible. What the fuck?
Yeah. And like he teamed up with this guy, this English guy, I think, called Joseph Mahoney. And Joseph Mahoney was like intrigued. It's like, what are you doing? And like to recover from these snake bites. And he's like, the indigenous people here use like goanna fat, and they rub goanna fat in like all these botanicals, and it basically just cures the snake bite. So what they did, he's like, there's money in this, and they started making goanna salve, and they literally became traveling like snake oil salesmen, but it was like goanna oil salesmen.
Literally just mincing.
They go around like with this show.
Tom, do you know what a goanna is? It's like a fucking enormous lizard, like a massive, like several foot long.
It's like Australia's answer to a Komodo dragon.
Yeah.
Holy shit!
I was driving in Australia once, and one like walked out in the middle of the road and was like sunbathing, and I was like, on the highway code, like driving test in the UK, they did not cover what to do if a goanna's sitting in the road. And I was like, do I go head end? Do I go round it head end? Do I go round it tail end? I didn't know what to do. I just sat there for about 3 minutes going, I don't know what the fuck to do. I'm not prepared for this.
But like, I saw a TikTok the other day of
You're
like,
so young.
This dude is like, oh, my dad has always had like, yeah, fuck off. Has like always had the weirdest pets. And his dad has a fucking monitor lizard, which is just like a smaller Komodo dragon that's just jet black, and he's like picking it up like a dog, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
So,
nope.
Do we know anything about him as a tattooer? Other than this. I mean, I love that. As you said, like you Google search him, and like the second hit is the Wikipedia page for this island. Going like,
yeah. Literally. So basically, once he was like court ordered to fuck his snakes off, I think he just decided I need another vocation. So he started painting and he started tattooing about 1930, and then he moved to Melbourne in 1941. So he was tattooing for like 10 or 11 years before moving to Melbourne. And then he set up his shop on Flinders Street, the same street that Johnny Dollar and Tex and all those guys were on. But this is pre-Johnny. And apparently he was selling booze out of there. He had his snakes in there. So he obviously didn't get rid of the snakes. He just got more snakes. He's just doing more snake shit in Melbourne now. He's like, Western Australia won't know about this. And so he's doing that. It was also a bit of a racket. I heard Dicky Reynolds also did it, where they would milk the venom of snakes and sell it to hospitals and stuff to create like anti-venom. So a few of them, they all had little rackets on the side. But he also was like, I heard this from Jed Hill, who told me he was like dealing morphine out the back of the shop in the alleyway. And it was just guys were queuing up, syringe straight through the shirt, next customer, same needle, just like boom, boom, boom. Just like jabbing guys with morphine.
Apparently,
once again, tattooing has gone soft.
Apparently, he also did part of his show was also like he did like a hypnotism show with some people. I found some records of that, like he working alongside a hypnotist called Carl Franks and a guy called David Hepburn. Like, just got to make a living, right?
But I don't even with the goanna salve. I don't think he got a dime from that. So that Marconi guy just like took his recipe and started doing it. And I'm pretty sure it's still a brand. Like it got after he died, Marconi got like knocked out in a bar fight and hit his head on the ground and died in like the early 20s. And then his family were like, you can. They sold the rights to it to like a pharmaceutical company, but they're like, you need to have JC Marconi on every tin. And that's another thing. It's in tins because apparently it was so potent, it would like fuck with bottles. So it had to be in a tin. But it doesn't contain goanna anymore.
Here's another great little Rocky Vane fact. So when he remarried, his new wife gave birth to a baby girl. Rumors swelled Perth the girl had been born with a snake's head.
Yes, I heard that because they're like, man, that guy's got so much venom in him. It's got to do something.
And then the article goes on. She divorced him in 1936 while he was still in jail for reasons of cruelty and desertion.
Yeah, she said he deserted him. It's like, he hasn't gone anywhere. He's been in jail the whole time. It's crazy. He had like three different wives, had a daughter to each wife. Yeah, crazy.
Is there any other like Australian tattooists who are equally as insane as Rocky?
I was going to say, I don't know if anyone is equally as insane, but I was talking to Jed Hill, and I was making a video, and I just needed someone to fact check sort of the order in which things happen on Flinders Street, and Jed worked on Flinders Street. So I struck up like a bit of a conversation with him. And the next day, he FaceTimes me over Instagram at like 8 a.m. I wake up to Jed Hill FaceTiming me. And he's just remembered more stories. And so he was telling me that Johnny Dollar co-owned a shop out in kind of a suburb here that's a bit of an industrial sort of area. And Jed was working there for a little bit with another guy called Gumboot. And Gumboot just wore gumboots or wellies every day to work. So there was an acupuncturist upstairs. And one day they were like, Gumboot wanted his back tattooed by Jed. And he's like, you reckon we can get the acupuncturist down? We can figure out some shit and we can do this painless. We can do painless tattooing. So they got the guy down. They put needles in his hands and in his feet and ran like an electrical current through it as Jed started tattooing his back. And I was like, did it work? And he goes, oh, fuck no, I just electrocuted him. And then he's like, it was like a horse. And he goes, we did one leg of the horse and had to stop. And I'm like, I like.
Actually, just made him.
He just thought it's like, this is bound to do something. Like, just like rogue science.
It just made it way worse.
Yeah.
I was going to say the other like very interesting and kind of chaotic story of Australian tattooing that we should probably talk about is Cindy Ray and Danny Robertson, right? Like that the story of how Cindy Ray became Cindy Ray, and how, again, you heard when I was quoting from the TCA newsletter, like Cindy Ray is the other kind of key contact, but she became a tattooer and a tattooed model sort of not quite by accident, but she was sort of a puppet for a while. Basically, she was sort of the face of something that she wasn't initially involved in, right, MJ?
Yeah, so she was a single mum, saw an ad in the paper looking for a model for this photographer. I think his name was Harry Bartram from memory, and he was basically like, "Hey, I want to photograph a heavily tattooed lady. You don't have any tattoos. I will pay for all your tattoos on the condition I get to pick what they are." So she was like, "Sweet, sounds good to me." So she was going and she was getting tattooed by Danny Robinson. Danny Robinson, I don't know where he was working at that point. He also worked on Flinders Street at one stage. So she was getting tattooed, and he was taking these photos. They created this persona, this stage name of Cindy Ray, the classy lassie with the tattooed chassis. And they were selling calendars. They were selling tattoo supply equipment, all these things. And it was huge, and it was huge overseas. And she wasn't making any money from it. She would be going as sort of like a carnival attraction. She would be sitting at carnivals as like the tattooed lady, the freak show kind of thing. And eventually she started dating Danny Robinson, and he broke his hand, and he was just like, can you just, fuck it, I got tattoos to do, jump in. So she started tattooing. She was just thrown in the deep end and started tattooing all these guys coming in. That might have been out in Williamstown, I think, which is sort of like a naval sort of area. So all these sailors coming in, and she just had to tattoo. They got married. They had a son who went on to become a tattooer as well. And yeah, she's iconic.
She's still alive as well, isn't she? And she was the first like kind of modern tattoo pin-up, right? Because of course there were other tattooed models and attractions in the past, but she was the first person to be really like actively marketed, as you said, as the tattooed model. And like during Australia were involved in the Vietnam War, so she was in magazines as a sort of centerfold in all kinds of in other ways around the time of Australia's involvement in Vietnam. And yeah, was again like you see, there was letters from her to Rudi Inhelder in the Rudi Inhelder collection. She was again one of these people that was one of the key connection points. Her and John Entwistle saw like the connection points between the Australian tattoo scene into the 60s and 70s to Europe and America. Like she's this really important linchpin, and like her and Danny broke up, right? And then she sort of struck out on her own and was like, yeah, fuck it, I'm a tattooer now. I'm going to run my own shit, and I'm going to take ownership of this thing that I was previously just the kind of face for, right?
Yeah, she had like almost like two careers. She had the career as Cindy Ray, and she's still kind of like tattooed under the name Cindy Ray. The whole sort of like monetizing the tattoo model sort of thing. They built this whole brand around it. The tattoo supplies, the catalogs, like the calendars, like all these things. So I think she definitely leaned into that when she was tattooing. But she was doing the night shift at Sailor Bill's Grotto on Flinders Street. She worked Williamstown. Like she's worked in like a bunch of sort of different places. But yeah, it's interesting that she just got thrown in at the deep end, started tattooing, and she retired from tattooing. I remember going to a convention and she was doing her signature on people at the convention, but she doesn't do that anymore. She's become like a bit of a recluse. I tried really hard to get her to come on my podcast. And I was talking to Patsy Farrow, who's one of her best friends in the whole wide world, and she was really trying to help me out. And ultimately, Bev is just kind of done with tattooing. And I think not just done with tattooing, but done doing favors for people. Her whole career was being used. What can people get from her? What can people get from her? And I think she's just at a point where she's got no more to give.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes that totally understandable. I know she was a friend of Lau Hardy's, and he talks about her very fondly. Like they still, I think, correspond. I think it's really interesting that to see, I'm putting over the research for the new book recently, like to see how these networks kind of just inform lifelong friendships and connections that really kind of end up informing what all of us, or the wake in which we are all living, I suppose. And then who else can we mention? Dicky Reynolds, you mentioned. He's someone who's a really interesting artist, right? He seems to be another really important figure that when people are sort of naming names of the pantheon of Australian tattoo history, Reynolds comes up a lot. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, so Dicky, he's had multiple shops. He was like, there's a couple of photos of him when he was younger, but most sort of records of him, he looks old as fuck. There are photos of him with Johnny Dollar. So Johnny was going getting tattooed by Dicky, and he was an elderly man then. They ended up opening a shop together in a suburb called Richmond on Bridge Road. There's a photo of them both standing out the front. I can send it to you. They're both standing out the front. Johnny's got a briefcase and wearing a T-shirt of the Phantom, the comic book character, and Dicky's got his button up, his little horn-rimmed glasses. And so they work together. I heard a story that Dicky used to be in the Navy, or said that he used to be in the Navy, and their ship got sunk and he was on a life raft with the other sailors. And they were out at sea for days, and they were getting to the point where they were contemplating cannibalism. And they're like, all right, well, Dicky, we're not going to eat you because you probably taste like shit with all those tattoos. So he's like, he's like telling people that tattoos will save your life, and that's the story that he gives them.
I was going to say that he tattooed for decades, right? Like 50, 60 years or more.
Yeah. Yeah, a really long career. And he's created such iconic designs as well. There is a design like the Dicky Reynolds Panther, which is, look, there is something up with that panther. It's really munted, but it's really cool. It's got like a green spine, lots of, like most panther tattoos, that's a lot of black. These are virtually open, like negative space. It's like someone's hit a bear with a shovel. It's like iconic. It's like you look at it and that's the Dicky Reynolds Panther. And it's like people are still getting it. Like people are getting that design because it's just iconic. Like that's the Dicky. Just like Johnny Donner's.
It almost looks kind of tribal. It's
kind of, yeah. And then like there's Johnny Dollar's most iconic design. It's the horse on its back legs with the snake going around it, So all those sort of guys back then, there tends to be an image, just like, Tony Polito has the Dude Ranch, like the skull with the cowboy hat, like that's the Polito design, or the Burt Grimm tiger. Like Dicky had this panther that is just, it's so bad it's good.
Famously, I have a fucking, if you can see it there, it's
yes, the little
cap. Yeah, it's a graduation cap because when I graduated from journalism school during COVID, they cancelled the graduation ceremony the day before, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do something because it's been a long time coming. So I went, found a tattoo artist, I was like, can you do this? And he was like, fuck yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, sick.
But I was going to ask, obviously we're talking about a lot of old heads. I'm sure you have some fun stories from your time tattooing in Australia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So when I worked in Wagga Wagga, it was an incredibly busy street shop. And there's so many small towns that surround Wagga that don't have tattoo shops. So we were just constantly busy. And there was also a psych ward attached to the hospital, and sometimes their valued customers would escape. And when someone's having a mental breakdown, they'd want to get a tattoo. So, people are coming in and you're like, something's not right about this. And then you clock the little wristband still on their wrist. And you have to like call and you're like, hey, one's escaped, like, please come get them, like that kind of thing. Yeah, so many. And then when I moved to Melbourne, I worked in a suburb called St Kilda, which is this sort of beachside suburb that is polar opposites. You got the super rich and you've got the super poor. So there's a real bad drug problem in St Kilda.
And you've got penguins.
There's a lot of junkies.
Penguins.
Yes, there are penguins in St Kilda, which I didn't believe. I thought it was like a joke, so I didn't go see them for ages. But yeah, they're tiny little baby penguins. But yeah, St Kilda's crazy. Like things would happen all the time. My boss at the time was like, if you have to throw down with a junkie, wear 2 pairs of gloves. Like that's going to save me. Like just double gloving if you have to fight a junkie.
Are you finding now things are a bit more like people are just bringing you in the stuff off Pinterest that everyone's getting, and tattooing's become more homogenous, or or is there still a particular kind of Australian style these days that people are getting, that if you see it out in the wild, you can go, that's an Australian tattoo rather than an American one, a British one, a Korean one, or whatever?
Oh, that's a good question. Like, I know you can look at stuff from Denmark and be like, that's Danish, or like Italian trad is sort of like a very specific kind of thing. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm just too close to it to notice. Maybe it might be recognizable from people not from Australia, but I don't think so. I think it's so diverse. There are so many different kinds, and I work in a private studio now where I pretty much just get to do the stuff that people are coming to me for. So I'm getting to just do the bold, colorful sort of classics. But yeah, people are probably still going into street shops down the road, getting the Pinterest sort of tattoos and stuff like that, I'm sure. But as for like an Australian style, I don't know. It'd be cool if there was. Well, actually, funny. There are guys that work in Sydney at a shop called Tattoo Rosie's. Caleb Harrower, who is a huge tattoo history nut, huge Bob Wood fan. Ben Hastings, originally from the UK. These guys are perpetuating what they're calling Sydney style and Aussiental. So it's really cool.
Okay.
It's sort of saying that, it's Aussiental. Dude, they're doing like sort of traditional images, a lot of like Bob Wood inspired stuff. Ben also does a lot of things inspired by like that old like Northern English kind of flash. But they're putting on like Japanese backgrounds to it, sort of like clouds around the designs, and then filling in like there's no negative space. They're just crushing out arms with wind bars and waves and all that sort of stuff. And they're calling it Sydney style and Aussiental, and it's really cool. So I guess the closest thing to an Australian style would be those guys that are really kind of like pushing that, which I hope that catches on.
I was going to ask as well, like, I suppose on a technical level, obviously the climate is very different in Australia than say it will be here in the UK. Do you find that you kind of have to adjust what you do to, counter the fact that like tattoos are so much more exposed to the sun? It's so much hotter. Obviously, if you're on the coast, people are going to the beach, they're going swimming. Do you find that you have to adapt to that a little bit?
Melbourne's pretty diverse, so not so much in Melbourne, but up in Queensland, especially like on the Gold Coast, I feel like there is a lot of like black and grey realism tattooers. A lot of people with tan sort of beach bodies, getting like black and grey realism, and just sort of like a lot of just like even traditional, a lot of like black traditional. There's still people doing color, but I'd say it sort of tips more in favor of black tattoos up there. I remember going to like the Byron Bay sort of area, which is sort of like the border of New South Wales and Queensland. And I remember seeing everyone, you made a joke earlier, the Aussie sleeve where it was on their legs, but like nothing on their arms. And I was going around and everyone's in shorts. Everyone has their legs fully tattooed and like virtually nothing on their arms. And I thought it was the strangest thing ever. And I got tattooed by a guy called Tom Burry. And I asked him and he's like, oh, yeah, I didn't even really notice, and I have no idea why that is, that everyone in that area at the time was just crushing out their legs. I don't know if it was a bit of like a trend or they saw someone else do it and they're just sort of following suit. But in Melbourne, climate-wise, it's so all over the place. It's 4 seasons in one day here. It's like super hot one day, freezing cold the next. It's unpredictable. So it's, yeah.
So this is
Yeah, interesting. It's funny. Before you said that, Matt, a friend of mine, he does a lot of Muay Thai, and he was in Thailand and then went to Australia for like 3 weeks just as a holiday after his training camp. And he wanted to get a tattoo, and he went into a shop, and he was wearing his shorts, and the guy didn't really know what to get. He was like flicking through the flash books and looking at the wall, and just chatting to the guy who was going to do it, and I was like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, and he was like, oh, I was doing like a 3-month training camp in Thailand and everything. And the guy had like used to do Muay Thai, and they were just like chatting and everything. And he was like, I have an idea if you're interested. And he was like, sure. He was like, "Do you have many tattoos on your legs?" And he was like, "No, not really." So like he has some stuff like on his thighs, and then just above his ankle on his left leg, he just has a big comic book bang, because he was like, that's the last thing someone's going to see before they get knocked out.
That's so good.
So this is on the back of Des Connolly's business card, probably from the, I'd say, mid '80s. Looking at the typography, so this was his aftercare instructions. Right. Aftercare for a tattoo. Number 1, no sexual intercourse for 3 weeks. Number 2, no alcoholic beverages for 6 weeks. Number 3, pick scab 3 times daily. Number 4, exposed to sunlight, cement, and salt water. Number 5, massage engine oil and salt into tattoo. Number 6, if you believe the above, I've got an opera house to sell you in Sydney.
Can you tell me the address that's on that business card?
Yeah, that's the Tattoo House and Museum, 2 Saxon Street, Brunswick.
Brunswick is where I am right now.
Wow.
They also, Des and Alf Mingens also work together on Sydney Road, which is the street that I'm on right now,
Yeah,
and it's now a shopping centre.
102 Sydney Road. They ran the Australian Tattoo Club out of that address.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. This is good. This is
So cool.
This is on the application form for the Tattoo Club of America, Tattoo Club of Australia form by Des. Say what you will about tattoos. In a scientific psychological examination known as the masculinity test, tattooed men rate, as a rule, far higher than untattooed men. So do women. Tattoos make you manly, says Des Connolly.
But I was gonna say as well, like Australia as a country is like generally has a much more, I suppose, lighthearted approach to life. Obviously, you're very, very funny people. Most Australians that I've ever met are, sick cunts, as you would say. And it's like, do you find that approach follows through to tattoos? Like people are more willing to get like kind of lighthearted or fun stuff versus like getting very serious. Here's this long story about my tattoo.
I think there's both. I've definitely done some rancid tattoos on people. I've done the Tasmanian Devil wearing a Sydney Swans Aussie Rules jumper, riding an e-scooter with a vape. I've done a sausage dog bursting out of someone's skin. Like a picture of Jesus that says "nailed it" underneath. There's so many. I find there is a pretty good sense of humor when it comes to tattoos, but it typically tends to be people that are already fairly covered, and they're just like, "Fuck it, my body's ruined as is." Like, but do you remember years ago there was that guy, the clip, and the guy would go around to live news broadcasts, grab the microphone, and yell "fuck her right in the pussy," and then run away.
Yeah.
I've tattooed that dude on someone.
What?
Yeah. Like,
I mean, to be fair, me and Matt's friend Darren Quinn, famed Australian, when I went in, it was like in April to get a tattoo for my birthday, because he was designing my chest piece. No, he hasn't gotten the design fully down yet. I was like, fuck it, I'll just pick something off the wall. So I got a nice panther on the inside of my arm, and then I was like, I'll just get something on the side of my knee. I was like, fuck it, there was a Mr. Peanut on the wall. I was like, let's do that. And he was like, fuck yeah.
yes.
So
I love that.
Other highlights from these Australian cards. This is from Sailor Bill's Tattoo Grotto, their card. Amongst other things, it says amateur and backyarders rubbish covered up.
My friend Reese Gordon has the Australian Tattoo History sort of Instagram and stuff, and he has an amazing collection of everything from flash to cards to just little knickknacks and artifacts. And he has like a miniature museum inside his shop in Sydney called Little Tokyo that anyone's welcome to go see. And there's a business card basically I can't remember if it was for the PTAA, which was sort of like the tattoo sort of organization, Professional Tattooers Association of Australia. And it was basically a business card that they would hand someone doing home jobs after they've flogged them. It was sort of like a calling card, like you've been bashed by the PTAA. And it was like, man, that is amazing.
Do you find that obviously there's so much more of an influence? Well, there's so much more of a bigger Asian community in Australia than say there would be here or in the US. Do you find that there's more of an influence from Asia on Australian tattooing than there will be elsewhere in the world?
I don't think so. I think a lot of, in my experience, a lot of Asian tourists and stuff that have come over here tend to want to get something to commemorate their trip in Australia. So they're getting more an Australian design, as opposed to coming from Japan to get Japanese tattoos done by an Australian, you know? I don't think so. I think like there would be stronger connections between the US and Japan, you know, through like Sailor Jerry and through Ed Hardy and things like that. But not so much in Australia. There is a great, like, incredible, like, Japanese tattooers and stuff over here, but I wouldn't say that's really dictated by the Asian population here in Australia. I think it's just an appreciation of Japanese tattooing
in general. Right. No, I was just there's just so many good cards in here. I was going to say, it just seems like going back to what you were saying a second ago, like removing what get called misfit tattoos or things like that seems to be quite a common refrain on like so many of these business cards from all across Australia. Clearly, like fixing backyard tattooing is quite a big driver for the professional tattooing in Australia in the mid '80s, by the looks of it. One can
it still is.
Still is.
Well, yeah, I suppose as we're kind of drawn to a close, MJ, is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't ask you, or any, I suppose, closing comments on Australian tattooing?
I just want to say that I've been listening to your podcast for a very long time. I've got the Painted People book written by Matt. I've recently subscribed to the Patreon. Actually, I have a question. This isn't, I'm not plugging anything, but I was talking to you, Tom, about this the other day, and I'd like to get Matt's thoughts on it. Like, I find it strange how within tattooing, so many tattooers adopt a persona or like a pseudonym that they go under. And it happens in every culture. You know, in Japanese tattooing, you have the horis, you know, which is like hori whatever, and it's like a fake name that they use. You know, people like Vaughan Griffiths and Tex Newell and like all these guys, Johnny Dollar, Cindy Ray, like all these sort of like aliases that they would tattoo under. Sailor Jerry, you know, like.
Lal Hardy was going to be called Johnny Reb when he first started tattooing.
Johnny Reb.
Yeah.
But how come it tends to be a thing that's so prominent in tattooing and show business and not really any other profession, and how it's like all these different cultures on their own have come to this. And even now, like people are going by, like tattooers are going by their Instagram handles and keeping their names private, even though we're not really tattooing the seedy underworld where we're trying to protect our identity anymore. Why is it that you think over all these cultures all over the world through various points in history, tattooers take fake names?
I think it's a really great question, and there's probably lots of different answers. I mean, like, for example, like George Burchett, right? Like that wasn't his real name. Well, it was his real name, but his actual legal name was George Burchett Davis. And he dropped the Davis because he said at least he wanted to avoid getting press ganged back into the Navy. Like he figured he could sort of go on the run a bit. And I think like for a lot of tattooers, it has been either socially unacceptable profession or a legally kind of grey area one, and just not having your real name out there just helped take a little bit of the heat off. And then, of course, like that becomes a bit of a kind of self-fulfilling thing, right? I mean, I think, for example, as I said, Lau, when he started out, was like, I want to be a tattooer, I need a name, right? So this kind of adoption becomes a thing that you do. I mean, it's the same with slightly another direction, actually, but I was talking to someone about this the other day as well, about how a lot of, I mean, even before there was a proper professional industry of tattooing, tattooers were taking on this title of professor. And again, that was a title to give themselves a certain amount of respectability. So go back to what we were saying earlier on about these two universes within tattooing, the crazy people and the respectable people. I think like the kind of taking on of a nom de tattoo, a kind of alias, is probably also one of those things that make divide the two halves of that community a little bit, right? Like there are the people that take on the crazy names, and then there are people that want to be taken seriously. And then, of course, like talk about the Japanese names. Of course, that then becomes again, that is something that has exists because of the kind of honorific apprenticeship system in Japan. But then Westerners see that and think it's cool and interesting and want to kind of ape it. Sailor Jerry called himself, not even slightly, quite dismissively, Hori Smoku, holy smokes, in this kind of racist pretense of a Japanese accent. So yeah, I don't know. I think it probably varies from place to place, but once it becomes a cultural trope, when you become Painless Jeff, or you become, as you said, a Sailor Jerry or Sailor Bill or Sailor Moscow, or Charlie Knight is another one who's changing his name, like. His real name was Leonard, and he was like Sailor Knight. Two Guns Ricks, which is a great name that he used when he was a sharpshooter. Those kind of things become a bit self-fulfilling, and you have to have a cool name that looks good on the banner, right? If you're working out of ports or in traveling shows, you need a kind of name that's going to sing a little bit from the from the banner.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think a lot of it has to do with branding. Like at the end of the day, is like now more than ever, it's kind of like having a strong kind of identity to what you do. It means you differentiate yourself from other tattooists. Like even if you look back in like the 60s and 70s, like tattooists were trying to differentiate themselves from other tattooists. I think if you look at like the Sailor thing, it's creating that kind of brand association with like Sailor Jerry. What if you look at Sailor Jerry? Who's Sailor Jerry going to tattoo? Probably sailors. And it's like you have people saying Professor
you think
adds
about
this sign of
Alf South, right? I mean, none of those. Well, yeah, Alf South was born Alfred Schmidt, right? It's not that easy to be a German in late 19th century, early 20th century Britain, and so he became Alf South when he moved to England. Tom Riley, his story was very, very difficult to trace because that wasn't his real name. Rich Hardy and Carmen Nissen found out that he was actually using his sister's husband's name, Riley, the surname. So yeah, a lot of this is kind of people finding tattooing as a way to exist away from their previous lives. And I think, there is definitely something to be. There's more thought to be said about this because, it's one of the things also that Terry Manton talks about this a lot. It's one of the things that's made tracing tattoo history is really difficult because a lot of these people don't use their real names.
Yeah. And I would say as well, like
our mate Lynn Rocky Vane was Lindsay Herbert Wagner.
Yeah. And there's loads of them. I mean, it's just examples keep coming to mind, like Hori Toyo, who was called Yoshisuke Kudo. He was then Peter Kudo when he moved to America and then sort of disappeared, presumably changing his name. There's lots of that, like people, especially at the time when record keeping was a bit less centralized and people were moving in and out of lives. it's very, very common in the early days of tattooing, and I think, as you said, becomes a bit of a trope, right?
And I think as well, like now more than ever, like you mentioned, Instagram handles. I think it going back to the branding thing, it's like, how do you infer kind of like what you're about through a name?
Grace
like
Neutral.
say a friend of the show,
Yeah.
Sammy Hellride, it's like you hear a name like Grace Neutral or Sammy Hellride, and you kind of can infer what the tattoos are going to be from that. Like Sammy sounds like, you know, a fucking Motorhead style, you know, rock band, and his tattoos look like that. Or like Grace Neutral's tattoos kind of reflect her name. And it's, you know, the same even with the name of this show. Like, I don't know if I've ever told the story on the pod before, but like so people know how this show started. I wanted to do a tattoo history show, and I knew that I couldn't really do it on my own. Because while I am an enthusiast, I wanted it to be different than like other tattoo shows, and, you know, spent 3 months going back and forth with Matt over email, where he only responded once every 6 weeks. Ironically, Matt, I said that to Gemma last night, and she was like, "Oh, he's better at responding to emails than me because I owe you one from 2 years ago." But like we had agreed to do it, and I was really, really drunk in the pub, and as I usually do, I have like ideas for shit, and I thought like Beneath the Skin, and I was like, oh, that makes sense because this like tattoos are technically under the skin, and it's also like we're getting deep beneath the tattoos to the meaning. We're going beneath the skin, we're going below the epidermis to get to the real meaning. And it's kind of like, yeah, it extends to like how tattooists brand themselves as well. As like, how do you infer what you're about just from a name? And Instagram, obviously, that's your whole brand. So yeah.
That George Bone, but that's his real name. I think he was christened George Bone. And then he was like, when he started out, even he thought he needed a name. His first name was Professor Baron von Bone, right? Goth tattooing.
That's great, though. That's fucking brilliant. He may as well have
called himself Schnitzel von Crumb.
MJ, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know this has been a long time coming, and you are a definitive friend of the show. And before we close out, I want to thank the other friends of the show, which is our £10 and above supporters on Patreon. Let's try and do this in one breath, as I usually do. 3, 2, 1, big inhale. Stephen McCann, Roy Hawks, Emma, Morpheus Ravenna, Chris Block, Charlie Lightning, Babov Extra, Shit Jesus, Seb Lewis, Reed Ford, and Kirsten Roy, Kathleen Burkhardt, James Schick, and Dylan. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of our patrons. As MJ mentioned earlier, we do have a Patreon. If you want to hear an episode like this up to 2 weeks early, and you want to support the show for as little as £3 a month, you can get some extra shit. You can get early access to any merch we do. We have a cool tote bag coming out soon. I just need to pay for the printing. And yeah, you can buy Matt's book on our web shop, or stuff like hats, t-shirts, posters. And yeah, thank you all very much for listening and supporting the show. Matt, thank you for showing up on time. And MJ, thank you for being on the show.
Mate. Thank you so much for having me.